Well, good afternoon, Chief Justice Carson.
Thank you.
You are the esteemed former Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court. I thank you for agreeing to be interviewed today as part of Portland State University's Oral History Project on Oregon's statewide land use planning program. My name is Katherine Daniels, and I'm the Farm and Forest Land Specialist for the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development. Today is Monday, June 29th, 2015, and we are here in DLCD's Salem offices. Why don't we begin by having you share a brief personal background about you and your family's arrival and settlement and early life here in Oregon.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to participate. My paternal grandparents and my grandfather came from Canada in 1889 and set up a law practice here in Salem. And he had 5 children. He and my grandmother had 5 children, 3 boys, 2 girls, and they all became lawyers. And one did not practice. One of my aunts did not practice. Another did and was an assistant AG for a number of years. And then my 2 uncles and my father practiced in Salem for some time until they passed away. I joined the firm after getting out of law school and then left to go on the circuit court, and then left the circuit court to go on the Supreme Court. Both my wife and I were born and raised here in Salem, and as was my father. My mother comes from Eastern Oregon. Her lineage dates back to somewhere around 1860 or early thereon. Her side came and settled in Grand, Union County. And she grew up there and then came down here and met my father and settled down. That's that history. Went to school here in Salem, Bush School, or it used to be, and Leslie Junior High School and Salem High. I'm old enough, there was only one high school in Salem at the time. I went to it. It's just over the railroad tracks. I joined in a lot of the civic affairs all through school, and Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and a variety of other things. So I enjoyed organized volunteer activity. And so I knew I would probably go into something like that, maybe law, not necessarily, but I was prepared to run for public office. And so I did. And my first, I'll back up a little bit, my first public office was Salem Planning Commission. And I'm not quite sure when I joined it. I joined it, I think, in the latter part of the 50s or early part of the 60s. And that my interest came, my father had a friend, and he was, Willard Marshall was his name, and he was an owner of a bottling company, Kist and some labels that have long since disappeared. And he was mayor of Salem, and he embarked upon a program with others. I think he called it massive cooperation, but it was an attempt to get the various agencies, city, county, state, to work together for the betterment of the area. And it was the major reason Salem was awarded the All-America city status in the late 1950s, 58, 59 or something. I was very impressed by that because even back then it was apparent that government does not always work well together. And not necessarily well with people, but they might be better at that. And from that came later to become the Mid-Willamette Valley Council, and it had county commissioners, city mayors, and state officials. And the leader of the planning side was a fellow by the name of Wes Kvarsten, K-V-A-R-S-T-N.
My first boss.
And he was, pardon me?
My first boss.
Really? Okay. Well, he was kind of my first boss. I was a volunteer on the Salem Planning Commission, and he administered the commission along with others. And then Alan Hershey was a good friend and came in later, and as both of them have passed away, unfortunately, both very good people. But Wes kind of led my hand through the city planning efforts. And then when I got in the legislature, he and others thought it would be good if we had good for Oregon if we had land use planning in an organized way throughout the state. In the first attempt, we had, I'm not sure whether it was passed in 67 or 69, I think 67. It may have been Senate Bill 10, but it was a plan for voluntary county by county land use planning. And it passed. The major structure then, if you go back at that time, was a fear that our valuable and limited agricultural land was being chewed up by developers, and because it's cheap land, you don't have to make roads over hills and things like that, it's all flat. And so there was a great concern that we needed get some control. Our major planning model was strip malls. As you can see, it's remnants around the valley and throughout the country. And so I was in the House at the time. A fellow by the name of Tom Hartung was a classmate of mine, later went on to the Senate. And he and I think it came to the Agricultural Committee, which I served and he served. And we helped get the bill through with Wes Carson's guidance and a fellow by the name of Corny Bateson, who was a farmer from Prattle, was in the House, and then moved the same year I was elected to the House. He moved to the Senate and was a very able person and helped get that passed. Governor McCall was the leader. Although I don't have much recollection of his role, my assessment of it was all voluntary, no teeth, and it was judged such by just about everybody that ran into it. Nice idea, good idea, and we'll keep it in mind, but it was not effective. So many people decided that we needed some teeth, some strength, some organization of it, and that started Senate Bill 100, which later became Senate Bill 100. I remember discussing getting Hector McPherson, who was a newly elected farmer from Lebanon, a very able fellow, but a legitimate farmer, and he had a great concern about what's happening to farmland. And if you look back at that time, you'll see the legislature tried a number of things to protect the farmland. Land use planning was one. Other was EFU, whatever that stands for.
Exclusive farm use.
Exclusive farm use, thank you. And with a payback if you cut it out. But what was happening, is obvious, is that all the farmland around the city became future city. And farmers were doing all right, in my view, financially, but they couldn't pay city taxes or housing taxes on farmland. So EFU zone came in, and then the deferred taxation was another mechanism the legislature came up with. And I thought it was all reasonably balanced, and I think worked reasonably well. But we were receiving substantial increase in population, and so the pressure was on to expand the cities and eat up more farmland. So that's what the land use planning effort, in my view, was made, and it was made to be mandatory and had teeth. Then one of the good things, I'll jump ahead, was we happened to have a very good leader who followed me in the Senate, L.B. Day, who was a friend, and he took over leadership of the commission and did a fine job and make it stand up and be noticed. So I'll quit there.
That's a great beginning. So from 1970 to 1977, after you had served in the House of Representatives, including as majority leader, you served in the Oregon Senate, and in 1973, Senate Bill 100 was passed. Given the uniqueness of Oregon's statewide planning program nationally at the time, and today, more than 40 years later still, to what do you attribute the ability of Oregon's legislators to be successful in passing such landmark legislation?
I haven't given that a lot of thought, but I think if I recall correctly at the time, people had asked me more recently, would I like to go back to the legislature again? And my answer was, if I could go back with the people with whom I served in the 60s and 70s, I think the answer would be yes. Had a good time and good people. That's not that I got along with them all the time, but it was much more bipartisan. We did have our partisan fights, but they were on usual partisan issue. And most of the people who served had a deep love for Oregon. And they could see that, this is my version, they could see that Oregon's worth was eroding to concrete and asphalt and quick houses. And so let's slow it down and be a little more steadfast in saving our greatest resource other than people, be our land. So it was fairly easy to pass. Then we had the good leadership of Hector McPherson and others who stood up and vouchsafed a great need for the future of children and grandchildren. And people heard it and believed it and voted for it.
All right. Well, in 1977, Governor Straub appointed you to the Marion County Circuit Court.
Yes.
I'm told by my predecessor that you presided over a case that LCDC brought against Columbia County to force the county to comply with an enforcement order to apply EFU zoning. LUBA had not yet been created, and Oregon's courts did not yet have much experience with land use matters. Do you recall that case or any other early cases, and did they present any difficulties for the court from the perspective of not having a lot of detail in the law on land use issues?
No, I don't. I remember I struggled with it, but the terms I was pretty familiar with, my experience in both on legislation and Salem Planning Commission.
Right.
And I knew how the system was supposed to operate, at least I thought I did. And so I do remember that part of the problem was the lawyers weren't very well trained in trial work. Many lawyers in those days would appear before planning commissions and this sort of stuff. But when it turned over to trial work, they had to transfer their trial skills over to land use planning. And that took a little while for all of us, judges included, to get used to the meter and the discipline of trying the cases. And I remember I came back from the Supreme Court after I'd been appointed to the Supreme Court to finish up a case I had in the Marion County Circuit Court that related, I forgot the name of it. But people found out that I had so much invested in it. To train a new judge on that particular case was time prohibited. So I was fairly used to going the 7 blocks between the Supreme Court and the Marion County Courthouse to, and that would only happen 2 or 3 times, I think. But no, I really don't remember much about the cases other than there was a learning curve to know who to call and to do the work well, or hopefully do the work well. So can't be much help there.
No. So then in 1982, you were appointed to the Oregon Supreme Court, where you served for 24 years, 15 of which was as Chief Justice. Are there any key land use cases that stand out in your mind as having been especially significant in interpreting Oregon's land use laws?
Well, let me get a little, but let me get a little aside. One of the things that I find most interesting, that you didn't ask the question, but the politician in me, I'll answer with my answer.
Yes.
It may not match your question.
Good.
One of the bills, it was a type of land use bill in the legislature called the Beach Bill. And to me, that is as landmark much as the land use planning. And I think the first opinion upholding the Beach Bill, well, let me back up. There's a unique aspect of the Beach Bill, and I think I'm correct in this, that when it first started, it was going to be the line of vegetation. That's where, between the beach, because Oz West had already declared that the wet sands were highways and belonged to the public. Between the wet sand and the dry sand, from beyond the wet sand, was presumed to be owned by the landowner, upland owner. But then the Supreme Court, before I got to it, upheld the Beach Bill. And what we had done with the bill was, when I was in law school, I did some studying, and the state line between Oregon and Washington along the Columbia was the mid-channel of the main current and main channel of the Columbia River. And as I understand the history, when they started building bridges and dams over the Columbia River, people started getting injured. In the Columbia, not as much as maybe the Willamette, but Columbia meanders. And so on a given year, the line between the state of Oregon and the state of Washington would differ. And so somebody came up with the idea, well, let's do it by engineering coordinates, degrees and measurement, and mark it as what the channel was at a given particular time, and survey it, and then write it down. Oregon and Washington legislatures agreed to it, and I went back to Congress and they agreed to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the boundary between Oregon and Washington. I've checked it recently, but one interesting idiosyncrasy about it is that the state never changed its county boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
and they stayed at the mid-channel of the Columbia River. So there are parts I maintain of our common boundary with Washington where the fixed land is not the same as the changing channel. And there may be parts of Wasco County that fall in between the coordinates in the main channel, and they're not in either Oregon. I mean, they may be in Wasco County, but they're not in Oregon. So
interesting.
Or the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
The other, which has caused no problem as far as I'm aware. The other thing was when we decided to shift to the 16-foot level for the beach elevation, which is about, we were told, about the average feet above sea level, mean sea level, for vegetation. We moved it to the 16-foot level, and then it was surveyed, and that's how the beach bill was laid out.
Mm-hmm.
And that reappears if you look at the portrait of Governor McCall standing in the second floor of the Capitol building. Huge, huge picture.
Mm-hmm.
He's standing there in his suit, and a little stump at the beach is over there. And here's this engineering aids rod, the red and white foot marks standing up there in a line. And to me, I have never talked to the artist about it, but to me, that's representative of the beach bill, that simple red and white stick.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an affiliation to that because for a couple, 3 summers, I worked for the State Highway Department as an engineering aide, and that was one of my jobs, to hold an indelicate, we refer to it as the idiot stick. You'd go out and hold it, and then a surveyor would shoot the elevations
Mm-hmm.
and you know where it is. But that's the connection that the beach bill with McCall. So every time I see that, I smile.
What a background.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Any other tales from the legislature?
I can't think of it. I've tried to think of some that might be helpful in further understanding what was going on. But it was a very cooperative legislature back in those days. And my particular party, when I was majority leader, as you already mentioned, in the House in '69, we had a 38-22 position.
And you were a Republican.
I was.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got to the Senate, it was 16-14, but then we had Deb Potts from Grants Pass, and he was a very conservative Democrat, so he usually joined with Republicans. So we were tied 15-15 for a long time, and on selecting the president of the Senate in 1971, we ultimately elected John Burns when Tom Hartung and I convinced him he ought to join the Republicans, and we would vote him to be president of the Senate. So he joined the 14 Republicans, Deb Potts, and his vote, and got the 16 votes to elect him as president of the Senate. And then he organized the Senate, because that's what presidents do.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, all the major positions went to Democrats, as they should. That's what we understood. And he fell out of great favor with many Democrats in downtown Portland, but I think he ran a good job and did a good job. He was from Condon in the early days, so a free thinker. So that worked out very well, I think, and we did well. By the time I left the Senate, and the margin was 24-6, And if anybody was interested, I would always assure them it was a lot more fun being a majority than a tiny minority. And I likened it to being the driver on the back end of a hook and ladder truck, sitting way back there. We didn't get to choose the streets we went down or the speed by which we moved, but we could kind of control whether we went a little left or a little right, at least the back end. So it was good, but I had given notice that I wasn't going to run again, and then a Jenna Schlegel, who was a sitting circuit judge, died of cancer, and Bob Straub called. Oh, I put my name in for. We increased the number of seats on the Court of Appeals from 6 to 10, and I voted against it because the bar didn't want it, and I thought the bar was more right than the court system, and but it passed. So undaunted, I put my name in to be appointed to the Court of Appeals. I did not get the appointment, and but not long thereafter, Governor Straub called me and asked if I'd like to take Jenna Schlegel's position on the circuit court. My father had served for a short period of time, a year or so, on the Marion County Court, and in a heartbeat, I said, sure, I'd be glad to. He did not like it. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I thought I would. And so I went on to the Marion County Circuit Court, and then let's see, who was it? Arnold Denicky retired. The Chief Justice, he retired, and I called my friend and fellow Republican senator when I served, and he was our majority leader in the Senate, Vic Atiyeh, and said if there's any chance I'd like to be considered. And so I was considered and got the nod. On the 13th of July of '82, I became a Supreme Court judge. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. Great people to work with. But those were easier times than we have now. And we did have partisan moments, but not many.
I've read that there was a lot of unanimity of opinion among many of your decisions.
Well, we worked hard on that. In those days, a number of us had been either trial lawyers or trial lawyers and trial judges, and saw that one of the major purposes of written opinion, not only deciding the one case that is in front of us, but leading others, citizens and lawyers and other judges, to understand what the rule of law is that comes out of that particular case. And if the court splits 4-3, then a change of one position on the court, and we see this all the time in the Supreme Court. SCOTUS, as they call like that, the Supreme Court of the United States. One person just changes the law upside down, just says yes becomes no, vice versa. And we deemed it important to have longer shelf life than the cases we wrote for the stability of trying the cases, trial courts, and all that. So we worked hard to get unanimous decisions. Everybody was encouraged if they wanted to write a concurring, to say a little bit more, but we wanted to get them to join as much as we could. And they agreed over that. And it's still true, I think, over that 13 plus years. Most of the people agreed if we can, let's make an unanimous opinion, and it'll have a little longer life, legal life, and we had, usually about 97% of our cases were unanimous. At the same time, which was a long time ago, the U.S. Supreme Court, about 48% of their cases were unanimous. And it's culture. None of us felt, at least most of us over time, did not feel any compulsion to write on everything. And we voted on everything, but one opinion is enough. So that was part of the fun.
Well, that's a remarkable record, and it seems to have gone hand in hand with the bipartisanship that you saw in the legislature in the same time span.
Well, we had altruistic, one of my favorite presiding officers, not of my party, was a fellow optometrist from Reedsport by the name of Jason Moe. And he could be quite partisan, but he was a very able administrator, and that just shone through, and so we were able to get the bills out and move forward.
What do you think it was that made people so willing to work together towards common goals?
Well, it was a kinder, gentler, to borrow a phrase from the past president, kinder, gentler time. And that was always kind of, I won't say always the Oregon tradition, but it was our attempt to treat the legislature as a living organism of state government, and it needed to be healthy, and it needed to be as nonpartisan as it could be. And so everybody worked hard. Not everybody, but almost everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I had no hesitancy going to a Democrat and seeking their vote on any bill. And there are times when I got more Democrat votes than Republican votes, as it should be.
So I've got a little list of some key land use cases that made it to the Oregon Supreme Court. I wonder
good for
if
you.
some
I
of
should have
them
done that research, but I didn't.
Well, a couple of them were on the top of my head, but I had to look up others. But Brent Mawr versus Jackson County, that distinguished the allowed uses from discretionary uses in EFU zone.
That was the wine, well, there's one from there that was the big one where they set up it was a vineyard, which is okay in EFU, and wanted to did put in a tasting room or something like that.
And events. That was the
And
Stoller decision?
Okay.
And that was after you left, I believe. but
Well,
you
there was
kept up
one that was
with it.
still there, because I had friends down in Medford, and
Was that the Craven case?
yes, I think it was.
Craven, before wineries were an enumerated use in the EFU zone, you found that they could be reviewed as a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use.
Right, yes, that's the one I
Craven.
remember.
And that indeed is a very important case for planners
Good.
today in interpreting what a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use
I'm
is.
glad it went that way, because that's now a major business all over Oregon.
That's right. Then, of course, there was the Curry County case, 1,000 Friends versus LCDC, the Curry County case in 1986 that established that urban uses are prohibited outside urban growth boundaries.
Okay, I don't remember that one, but
That was a big one. Dolan versus City of Tiger, did that come to you? The
I remember the name.
Exactions, the forced improvements for commercial use in Tigard. The landowner was forced to create a bike path on the property.
Oh,
and it went
yes.
up to it was overturned at the U.S. Supreme Court.
that happens every now and then.
Not
Yes.
too often.
I remember that was, in order to get his land use, he had
Yes.
to build a bike path.
That's right.
And I think the evidence was that nobody in his company rode a bike, but he still had to do the bike path. And yeah, that went on all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
It did indeed. So just coming from a more overall perspective, what do you believe have been the major accomplishments of Oregon's statewide land use planning program over the years?
But confessing that I've gotten, since leaving active trial practice and in the circuit court, in the Supreme Court's my impression of the land use planning is my own observation and reading the press and the few cases that we had. I think it was a grand adventure, and I think it has brought stability, did then, and I think it still does, to development, with cautious planned development. So I think it was the right step, and I think it's grown in strength. And LUBA and the commission has sometimes waffled a little bit, but that's true of all human endeavors. But I think by and large it's been very steadfast and has brought us to the point we are now with a strong land use program. I believe it is. You could attest or disagree, as the case may be.
We're interviewing you today.
That's true. That's true.
I don't want to prejudice you.
Yes.
And what do you think have been the most serious challenges or setbacks the program has faced over the years?
Well, probably one of the strengths is also one of the setbacks, and that is the chafing or the abrasion between local governments and state governments in making uniform and consistent rulings and helping the law develop. It's been much better than it has been in error, but that's human nature. That was a problem. Probably still is.
That was going to be my next question. Whether you think legislative actions, court actions, and LCDC actions have maintained an appropriate balance between state and local government rules. Have we achieved that right balance yet?
I think so. But I'm not to be trusted because I'm one of the bureaucrats on the state side, and that is my child, and my child has done very well. Thank you. So I'd be more interested in what city councils and city planning and county planning units think is working. But my observation was then, it was brand new, and we took away the autonomy, the individualism of the county planning commissions and city planning commissions, and that it took their good faith and support to do it, and it lasted. There was not uniform, and we didn't have to go those days. We didn't have a referral or any kind of a petition to put it into vote. I don't know what would have happened, although I keep going back to the fact that I think most Oregonians, maybe not urban Oregonians, really urban, we only had one urban center, Portland, cared much about agriculture, but everybody else did. And so that was, we had a good audience, and that's what part of our success was. And many of us grew up on a farm. My wife lived on a farm for a while. I didn't. I lived on Leslie Street all my life. But I picked beans and berries and everything else. I spent my summers on a farm for many years. And so we had an affinity for farm activity, and meant something to us.
And of course, today agriculture still is the second most significant economic sector in the state.
Yeah.
Are there any important land use topics or policies that you think LCDC overlooked in developing the goals? Or any areas that have not gotten sufficient attention?
I think initially the answer would be yes. I can't put my finger on it, but I think there were some that were overlooked, but I think it was brought to their attention over the years. And as far as I can tell, as I said, I'm not directly involved in it. They've done a fine job of addressing the goals, much better than other agencies of state who ignore the problems sometimes. And no, I think they've, and I credit the aggressiveness of keeping up with it with people like LB Day and others that follow it.
So the farm and forest land protection has been a core element of the program, of course, but also planning for development, including urban growth boundaries, housing, public facilities, transportation, economic-related development. Do you think the state's been successful in balancing those two sometimes conflicting
They're almost
goals?
always conflicting.
Almost always conflicting.
Yes, I'd say yes, but again, that's in my DNA change now, so I'd be inclined to say yes, we've all done a good job. But no, I think it's an area of conflict, but I think we have done a good job and have balanced better than most the conflict between cheap land and farmland and expanding population. And the infrastructure tends to suffer, but that's more of a dollar issue than it is a planning issue, in my view.
What are your views regarding the efforts of the Land Use Watchdog Group, 1,000 Friends of Oregon, and some of the spin-off friends groups around the state?
It probably depends on the issue. Sometimes I would agree, both in the legislature and then thereafter, I would agree. I think overall that is one of the good models of how citizens can participate vociferously, actively, financially, in shaping government. It was, back in my day, a very, well, powerful is an overstatement, but an important body that was following carefully what LCDC and the other organizations did, and I think for the better. So I'm glad we had them, and or have them. I like to think we would have done, both the legislature and the courts would have done the right thing, but it always helps to have somebody there who's smart, and they had several folks that were really smart and knew land use planning, knew the law, helped make the law, and were not shy about sharing their view of
Right.
what the courts ought to do, or what the legislature ought to do, or what the public ought to do. So I think they tended to nag a little bit, I think, if I remember correctly. But good for Oregon. So.
And of course, they were a watchdog group largely for the LCD.
Yes.
To make sure that the executive branch was adequately implementing
Yes.
new legislation.
Yes, they would blow their whistle every now and then. Felt that somebody was going off base.
That's right. Were there any other organizations that you think played a significant role, either positively or negatively, towards the development of the program?
I can't think of any right now. I mean, 1,000 Friends, of course, I think we all knew that those who were distractors used to call them 1,000 Fiends, and I probably shouldn't say that, but no, I don't remember. There were others. There were those who were on issues, but I don't recall them with any specificity. So.
There are some who feel that the department, the LCD, needs to do more to make the program more equitable and fair and politically stable. Do you feel that additional work needs to be done in this area?
I probably, number one, the buzzwords that you used, which weren't your words, or maybe they were, but I don't think they were, cloud the issue. And we're seeing that now in all kinds of issues that kind of cloud the real issue. And so I'm just not well enough informed to say they're doing a great job or they're not doing a good job at all. I have no sense that they're failing, so that I'd probably put a mark on the positive side.
Of course, Measure 37 and then Measure 49 were intended to provide more fairness for landowners who felt that they were caught by the program and not able to develop. And then, of course, the legislature authorized a lot of record provisions also for people who held land as of the time of acknowledgement and were caught by zoning regulations. So there had been some effort to provide equity and fairness, but not everybody agrees that that was enough.
That's right.
So, and of course, there have been several measures that were passed over the years.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, Measure 37 and 49 were the ones that really had most effect. Do you think that Oregon's land use planning program achieved what was originally envisioned in 1973?
I do.
Okay. All right. What are your thoughts about the future of Oregon's land use program? Do you think, or what do you think should be done over the next 40 years to address some of the critical challenges that lie before us, such as population growth, the economy, climate change, the environment, affordable housing, and so on?
Well, that is difficult for me. All our outcomes, I think it would be folly for us to think that we could land use plan our way out of economy. And transportation is one issue. For years, I think we've had a good Department of Transportation or highway department. And so, unlike many other states where a legislative career was measured by the miles of asphalt that were used in your district during your term. And I cite the state of Washington as an example back in my day. And that was not the history in Oregon, in my view. But our transportation system is struggling. If you've been been reading the letters to the editor and the squabble that's going on about Portland's a fun city and Salem isn't. And there was a letter this morning that said somebody was critical of our crowded streets and no parking and one-way streets. We ought to be more like Portland. And I read that and I thought, where is he living? And that's kind of what the letter editor said. What's he talking about? He hadn't been to Portland for a while.
No.
Because they have parking problems, they have one-way streets, and their congestion is horrible. And that's what we have. Salem has always had congestion problems before we had we have wide streets. You know, if you lived in Eugene, you have a 50-foot wide way, right away downtown. We have 99 feet.
Oh.
And when those were platted, that was 99 feet of mud. And so Eugene has those very narrow streets, and they went to one-ways very earlier. And we have the big 99 streets that now are one-way, and I think that's fine. I remember one chief of police that I think came from the LA area and couldn't understand how much traffic Salem had when the exit and entrance counts didn't indicate that we'd have that much traffic. Mm-hmm. And what I believe to be true then, I don't think it's so true now, and in part the shopping centers have corrected that, and that is that we used to drive around the block till we found a parking spot in front of the place we were going to go shop. And that creates an awful lot of congestion, just going around and around and around. And I guess that's why, after a long time, I don't know this, the city of Salem changed that one block between Liberty and Commercial that was two-way on State Street in front of Jackson Jeweler and Hunway. And it used to be one-way eastbound. Now it has one half of it is westbound and one half is eastbound. And I guess the city council had some commercial need because the next street up, of course, Court Street is westbound. Mm-hmm. So it still controls, but I had. So to answer your question, I don't know what the answer is going to be. They're going to be difficult. I think infrastructure is going to be a real problem. Bridges. As I mentioned earlier, I worked for Luther Jensen, who was the district bridge engineer when I was in college, and so a lot of our bridges were built with that edge, and we built very good bridges, I think, but they're getting old, so it's going to be a problem.
And what about climate change? Does our program, our land use planning program, need to be thinking about that?
Surely. I'm a denier, so and I'm less moved by that, which is contrary to the media, I realize, and others. But the interesting part is that the effect of let's assume for this conversation it's cyclical, and that is the ice cap grows and it will diminish over decades. We'll have warmer summers sometime and colder winters sometime. That has effect on what we do in Oregon. We're not much of a financial capital. As you indicated, we're agriculture, we're also forest land. Most of our stuff is outdoors. And I saw an interesting, I never thought about it, but it was a report on television this morning about how the red wine in the California vineyards are better the last year or two because of the drought. And the story goes that two things. One, the grapevines average about 6 feet into the ground. They now go down 12 feet looking for water. And that the fruit is smaller, but it is richer and more fruity. So it's actually changed the taste of wine. So yeah, that makes a difference. The climate change, because it does change, has an impact. And droughts, California is not a good model for me. I went to college in California. It's not a good model for reaction, yes. For planning, no. And so I think that it will make a difference, and we may have to change. There may be things that we can't grow anymore, or there may be things that are even better, and we can compete more with France or someplace else. And I don't think there's a role for government in that, unquestionably, but have to be on our toes. Yeah.
So Oregon has grown substantially since the start of the land use planning program, and more than half the people who live here now weren't here when the program was begun.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the department and others should be undertaking any kind of particular outreach efforts to communicate to the public the value of the program? You see relatively few articles in the newspaper anymore, relatively few editorials, unless there's some controversial topic that involves the agency. Should we be doing something more?
I've thought about that because I'm unhappy with what the printed media particularly is doing. I remember the days when there was a Capital Journal newspaper and an Oregon Statesman. I think the coverage of the legislature is better, but almost everything else, maybe sports, but almost everything else is moved to the human interest side, which is informative and helpful and well written in many cases, but it doesn't advance planning, in my view, or foreseeability of problems and solutions. So, and it's going to get worse. I got a notice today, we took a little magazine published by the Consumer Reports called Smart Shop, and we didn't like it. It told you what products to buy, more than Consumer Reports does. A little card saying they're discontinuing Smart Shop because it was expensive to do and not enough people followed it. And they also advised us that they're moving more to digital, which I mean, by that means electronic. I'm still back a decade or two. They're moving to digital and abandoning some of their printed publications. That's not good news to me. I'm of the old school that I have a hard time reading the length from the computer. So if it goes to digital, we'll be less informed than we are today, I think. Now, the younger people coming up who are computer competent, maybe, but the computer is also a prized interest. I don't see a young person sitting down at a computer and studying land use planning laws. They don't do it when it's published in a paper, and I don't see them do it just because it's now electronic. So we do have an information problem. Can the department do more? The answer is always yes, but
could schools do something?
Well, before your department gets your nose in that in schools, I'd like to have it get in the civil law and the constitutions into schools, and so they understand how this all supposed to work. And not just Oregon. I got a good education, I think, from Salem Public Schools, but we learned more about things that were in front of us.
Civic issues.
I think my granddaughter, they live in Anchorage. She told me how many times they watched, Gore's, something, Inconvenience.
Inconvenient Truth.
Inconvenient Truth. Taught in almost all the classrooms. So I've already declared myself to be a little more conservative than that. But if that's their idea of civic, then we're doomed. I don't think it is. Yeah, I think education, I think on balance we have a really good education system. And some children do very well in the system. And many don't. And of course we have a fresh culture and a fresh population of people that have not had the advantages that the people who went to kindergarten here or grade schools here.
On the other hand, I'll just offer this, having been worked in the program for some years and then been gone 23 years and have come back for several years. The program's a lot less controversial now than it was then. There seems to be a lot higher degree of acceptance.
Oh, I think so.
Part of local government.
Oh, yeah.
And that certainly has been noticeable.
Oh, yeah.
On the part of someone who's been gone for so many years.
Well, I would credit that a lot to LCDC and to your department and others, because we don't have to walk many steps from where we're seated right now to go to agencies that have really blown it with credibility with the public. You know, like the one over there where they refunded 2 or 3 years ago, some Oregonian filed a tax refund for hundreds of thousands of dollars. They paid it. You know, it's like, how many? 40 million, maybe as many as 40 million federal employees, past and present. All their information has been hacked. And I think your department's done well. Several others have. But there's some around here still saying we need more money. And yeah, that would help.
Well, we have always had a small department.
Oh, you always
55
have.
agents,
Oh, yeah.
55 people, and there's been a kind of a bond, I think, and a kind of an idealism among a lot of them.
Well, you had the good leadership early on, and I think that just stayed with you. And so I think the fight's never over. I don't mean to sound uppity about it, because misfortune could befall us, but I think it's confronted an awful amount of huge increase in prices and survived that, and all the kinds of transportation problems we still have, and service problems in cities and counties and state or not. I think a good job. Could do better. Doing a good job.
Well, is there anything I haven't asked you that you would like to
You
talk
sure
a little
put a
bit
lot
about?
of good time in this. I'm impressed. I learned more from this interview than you did, I think.
Well, anything else you'd like to add, or any other thoughts or reflections that you have on your work in your career, or observations about the program?
I think not, Catherine. You've done a very good job of working the problem together and helping me get through it. I think we've come a long ways, but I think it's been a mission for those, I think, I don't say you necessarily, but to make the thing work, and the thing being land use planning. And you know, that's a touchy subject in any day, and any week, in any place, because you're talking about private property, at least in this country. And yet, I think we're local and state have done an excellent job of explaining to the public why it's all in all our interest to have some sense of this land use planning. And also participation. You kill a lot of people attending public meetings in Staten or Philomath, or wherever it may be, to talk about land use planning. And that's great. It's a little heated at times, but it's good.
Well, Chief Justice Carson, this has been a real treat.
Well, thank you.
I thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Well, thank you.
And shake your hand.
Thank you,
Thanks so
Kathy.
much.
Well, I've enjoyed it, and I wish I'd had more research. I've taken more research, so I've been more responsive to your questions. But
You were wonderful.
you helped me a lot by leading me along.